Being able to position your body effectively in the wheelchair can have a very big impact on your ability to perform wheelchair skills. Leaning forward, backward, and sideways at the right time can make the wheelchair easier to push or maneuver, lower the risk of tipping or falling out of the wheelchair, and improve your ability to reach for objects safely. In the next section, we will review how you can change your posture while using the wheelchair and situations where this may be helpful. Normally, we sit relatively upright when using a wheelchair. In this position, most of your body weight is over the drive wheels in the back. This is usually a good position to be in because it makes the wheelchair easier to push or propel and keep it stable and unlikely to tip. However, there are some situations where it is useful to lean forward in the wheelchair. First, leaning forwards makes it easier to reach items in the front. This might be a newspaper on a table or a napkin that has fallen to the floor. Reaching forwards may be necessary if you want to flip up your footplate or release and swing away the footrest with your hand. In these situations, you should be careful and pay attention to several potential risks. You can potentially slide or fall forwards out of the wheelchair or become lightheaded if you lean too far too quickly. To reduce this risk, try to keep your bum as far back in the wheelchair as you can and lean forward with your trunk and hips. Don't slide your bum to the edge of the wheelchair if you are going to lean forwards. Never reach further than you feel comfortable or to the point where you feel lightheaded. If you are reaching forward with your right hand, use your left hand to hold on to the wheelchair for balance and support. Holding the armrest or sliding your hand or arm behind the backrest is a good way to secure yourself when reaching ahead. If you are able to lift your feet off the footrests and place them on the floor, it is both easier and safer to reach forwards towards the ground. Another potential risk with leaning forwards is the wheelchair tipping towards the front, which can be both alarming and potentially cause you to fall forward. This is most likely to happen when the wheels in the front, the casters, are pivoted around in the trailing position, making the wheelchair less stable. You can reduce this risk by moving the wheelchair backwards slightly so the casters swivel forwards. A second situation where you may want to lean forwards is when the wheelchair is in a backwards tippy position. For example, when you are pushing up a ramp or incline, the wheelchair wants to tip backwards. By leaning forwards, you can make the wheelchair more stable and easier to operate. Similarly, when you are trying to get your drive wheels up and over an obstacle, leaning forwards can take some of the weight off the drive wheels and make it easier to push. There are some situations where leaning back in the wheelchair is helpful. Although we generally sit upright in the wheelchair, we often sit slightly forwards with our shoulders away from the backrest. By straightening your trunk and bringing your shoulders or even your head backwards, you can shift your weight further back in the wheelchair. This is helpful in situations where you want to get your casters over an obstacle or even briefly pop them off the ground. For example, propelling over an electrical cord or on carpet is easier if you take some weight off the casters. Leaning backwards can also be helpful when the wheelchair is on a forward slope, like going down a ramp. By leaning backward, the wheelchair is less likely to tip forwards and you are less likely to fall forwards if the wheelchair stops suddenly. Leaning sideways can be useful in a number of situations. When you want to reach an object like a doorknob or retrieving something from the floor, leaning to the side can get you closer. Leaning sideways can be useful when you want to change sitting position in the wheelchair or reduce pressure over one side of your bum. A third situation where you may want to lean sideways is when you are propelling across a slope and the wheelchair wants to turn sideways. Leaning towards the top of the slope can keep the wheelchair straight. Just like leaning forwards, if you are reaching towards the right side, try and hold on to the armrest or backrest with your left hand to keep your balance. Never lean further than you feel comfortable or to the point where you can lose your balance. The biggest risk when leaning is that you fall sideways or, although very unlikely, the wheelchair tips sideways.